Thank you, and welcome back to Governance Week 2026, Governance in a Volatile World. We are on to day 3, Governance of State Enterprises, and we had this morning a really riveting presentation from Mr. Diego Thomas that introduced us to some really amazing concepts in practice in Jamaica with respect to governance of their state enterprises that we all wish in the region we can just take wholesale, and put into our public sectors in the region. But they have been on a long journey, and so we too need to pay our dues and make sure we get our frameworks in place. And it begins with understanding what we're doing, why we're doing it, and exactly what we need to do to keep it in place. And so many of our discussion so far revolves around some of these issues. So we just completed our first panel this morning, and now we move on to panel 2. Policy, Politics, and Performance, Navigating Governance in Complex State Systems. We have 3 panelists, Mohini Somaroo, Dr. Dionne Chamberlain, and Dr. Charlene Sharpe. So we would have our moderator give the introduction in a short while when she takes charge of her panel. So I will begin by introducing her. Our moderator today is the lovely Tonika Wilson-Gabriel. Tonika is a partner in PwC Legal and has over 17 years experience in providing corporate, commercial law, tax advice, and tax compliance services for international and local companies in several sectors. She's qualified as an attorney at law and is admitted to practice law both in Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, of course, Guyana being her home country. In addition to her legal education, Tonika has a Bachelor of Arts in History and an MBA from Heriot-Watt University. At PwC, Tonika provides advice and consultancy services to a significant number of companies operating in several sectors on a wide range of issues, including corporate compliance, commercial law, immigration, and tax compliance with regulatory requirements. So there's a lot more you can learn about Tonika. It's in the profile that we shared with you in the agenda earlier. This is just a short summary of her profile. But Tonika, it is always a pleasure having you at CCGI events and particularly here for Governance Week 2026. So welcome to the CCGI stage, and I hand over this panel discussion to you now.
Thank you very much, Kamla. Thank you to the CCGI team for such a warm welcome, and it's always a pleasure to be part of these events. So good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be your moderator today, and welcome to this panel discussion as part of the Governance Week 2026. Our session today, as Kamla would have indicated, is titled Policy, Politics and Performance, Navigating Governance in Complex State System. And it's, of course, under the general theme of the Governance Week, Governance in a Volatile World. I am Tonika Wilson-Gabriel, as Kamla would have mentioned, and I'm happy to be your moderator today. We are living in times of unprecedented volatility, no doubt, and complexity where governance framework are constantly being tested by shifting political landscapes, economic uncertainty, and emerging social challenges. Effective governance in such an environment is therefore critical to ensure resilience, accountability, and sustainable development within our state sector and in our organizations in general. We are honored to have with us today a distinguished panel who bring rich perspectives from and expertise from across the Caribbean region. So it is a diverse panel, and it is my pleasure to introduce these lovely ladies to you today. So I'm going to start first with Dr. Chamberlain, Dr. Dionne Chamberlain. Dr. Dionne Chamberlain is the Managing Director and partner in a successful bilingual consulting regional firm known as Chamberlain Consulting Limited, located in Belize, Central America, which operates on a social entrepreneurship basis. In her volunteer capacity, she is the chairman of the Belize Coalition of Service Provider. She holds a PhD in business administration and a master's degree in global management from Phoenix University. She has completed a number of specialized training programs, including leadership at the Center for Applied Sciences in Geneva, Switzerland, Prosky Change Management, DIS, Debriefing, and Six Sigma. She continues to pursue growth through training and is committed to growth and development of companies across the world, but specifically in the Caribbean region. She is an expert trainer in market access strategy, utilizing Caribbean Export Services Go Global program, as well as in consumer service, teamwork, and leadership. She volunteers on many boards, such as the Cancer Society, Mental Health Association, and is the chairman of the Belize Coalition of Service Provider and board member of PFF Capital. She serves as an adjunct lecturer for Galen University in strategy at the master's level, UE EMBA program, and the University of Belize. She has authored 4 self-help books known as the GLOW series. The proudest capacity she holds is, of course, being the wife of an engineer, Victor Miranda, and mother to Matthew and Zachary. She believes that the level to which she can serve others is the level you choose to take care of yourself. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Chamberlain, I'm going to introduce the next panelist before we get into our conversation. So just bear with me for a few minutes while I get all the introductions out of the way. Our second panelist is Ms. Mohini Somaroo. Mohini is the Deputy Managing Director and Company Secretary. She is the first Deputy Managing Director to be appointed at the only government-owned terminal in Port Georgetown, the Guyana National Shipping Corporation Limited. Her appointment took effect in January 2026, and she also still holds the position or the portfolio of Company Secretary of that company. She is the holder of a Master's in Business Administration degree from the Bedfordshire University, a Bachelor of Science degree in Public Management from the University of Guyana, and is currently pursuing her second master's, this time in Strategic Development Studies at the University of Guyana. In her role as Deputy Managing Director, Mohini has direct responsibility for areas such as property management, security, procurement, human resources management, and information technology, while providing indirect oversight and guidance to the Finance and Operations Department. In maintaining her role as company secretary, she serves as a liaison between the board of directors and management and heads the legal compliance arm of the company. Mohini is a professional with more than 25 years experience in both public and private sectors in Guyana and is passionate about learning and development, which led to her teaching as her stress relief, sharing her knowledge and learnings with students at the secondary and tertiary levels. In her spare time, she loves spending time with her niece, traveling, and being one with nature and catching a good action movie. Welcome, Mohini. Our next panelist is Dr. Charlene Sharpe, Associate Provost, University Administration, North Caribbean University. Dr. Charlene Sharpe is a distinguished academic with a background in geography, environmental science, and public administration. She earned her PhD in geography from Rutgers University, which she focused on research on food security, climate change adaptation, hazard management, and community resilience in small island developing states. Additionally, Dr. Sharpe holds 2 MSc degrees from the University of the West Indies in Natural Resources Management and Government. Further, solidifying our expertise in urban and rural integration, environmental development, international relations, and public administration. Our academic journey is marked by numerous accolades and fellowships, including the prestigious Fulbright Scholarship. In our professional career, Dr. Sharpe has held several influential positions, including Associate Provost and Associate Vice President of Academic at Northern Caribbean University. In these roles, she has demonstrated exceptional leadership in strategic planning, curriculum development, and institutional accreditation. Notably, Dr. Sharpe led the development and implementation of the university's strategic plan between 2022-2027, redesigned the core curriculum, and established a comprehensive academic advising model. Our efforts have significantly enhanced the university's operational efficiency, academic quality, and student success rates, securing institutional accreditation and fostering an improved work climate. Beyond academia, Dr. Sharpe governance experience is extensive. She has served on various boards, including the National Solid Waste Management Authority, serving as the chairperson, and the Jamaica Fire Brigade, where she has contributed to risk management and technical operations. Dr. Sharpe expertise extends to consultancy roles with organizations such as Caribbean Disaster and Emergency Management Agency and Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Our contribution to governance and risk management underscore our commitment to improving institutional frameworks and community resilience, making her a pivotal figure in both academic and public service sector. She was elected to the board of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute in May 2024. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed my honor to present this distinguished panel to you, and I will first invite Dr. Dionne Chamberlain to give her thoughts. Each panelist, just before Dr. Chamberlain comes on, just to give you some broad insight, each panelist will be sharing basically their perspective in respect of the industries that they operate, the impact, and from a broader governance standpoint, the impact of on companies, and stakeholders, and will give their thoughts on how these challenges can be addressed for long-term success. So Dr. Chamberlain, over to you for your comments.
Yes, sorry. Thank you, moderator. It's a privilege to join this distinguished panel and contribute to this a very important conversation. Sometimes when we discuss Caribbean governance, we tend to get stuck into two distinct rooms. In one room, we debate high-level paradigms. In the other room, public servants are working tirelessly with rigid bureaucratic structures just to keep the wheels turning. But looking at governance through the lens of private sector execution and through our consulting practice at Chamberlain Consulting, I've come to realize something very simple. The most beautiful architectural blueprint or 90-day plan, as most politicians put out in the world, means nothing if the plumbing is clogged. Good governance isn't just about passing the next great piece of legislation or writing a flawless 5-year strategy. It's really about delivery pipeline. It's about simplifying processes, aligning incentives, and removing the friction that really slows down our economy. Today, representing the coalition, I want to take a pracademic view, an academic practitioner who bridges theory and lived experience. Together with my other experience, this has reinforced one major lesson for me. It is about creating institutions that can implement effectively and consistently. We have to look at fixing the operational plumbing that we already have because we can't start off from scratch. So we have to look at, yes, the policy, and that sets a determination whether what is politically possible can actually work. Then there's the politics. Choosing the route determines what is democratically possible in the first place. And then finally, the performance, which tells us whether we have actually arrived. People rarely ask us whether a policy was elegantly written or if it was done by some big hotshot consultant. They only ask, was the healthcare improved? Were the roads built and safer? Are starting business easier? And can our governments be trusted? That really is simply the true test of governance. So as we look at it, the Caribbean presents a fascinating governance environment. Our countries are simultaneously small and extraordinarily complex. We are managing climate vulnerability, limited fiscal space, global economic uncertainty, technological disruption, migration, demographic change, brain drain, and increasing public expectations, while they remain so rooted in entitlement and expecting what governments should give rather than what they can do. All of this with relatively small public sectors and limited administrative capacity. Now, these external shocks, like climate change, like as I was listening to the sessions earlier, like what happened in Jamaica and what happened in Venezuela, can cascade across an entire national economy. And from one day we're prosperous to the next day we're rendered helpless and begging for aid out there. So managing global regulatory compliance with lean administration capacity requires that every institution looks at what their weak links are and how it is disproportionate to the national impact. And then, of course, the continuity imperative, balancing our 5-year electoral cycles with long-term national development, which is difficult because all our politicians are thinking about is the next voting cycle and can I come back in? Strong governance creates institutions that perform regardless of who is in office. And that is what is important that we need to understand. Small does not mean simple. Governing a small state requires even greater coordination because every little single institution actually matters. And during these politicization periods, we spend more time fighting against each other, disrupting each other, stopping each other from actual growth, rather than looking seriously at how can we really move forward with this accountability. Now, Belize offers an instructive case study in managing systemic complexity. We're geographically Central American, we're historically Caribbean, we're legally rooted in the Commonwealth, we operate across multiple regional identities simultaneously. That diversity does present opportunities, but it also demands agility because we are just like the rest of the Caribbean, trying to figure out who can we get the most out of from, especially when we even toss up the Taiwan, China. Where do we go? Where do we support? These complex challenges like digital transformation and climate adaptation are not isolated policy issues, they're governance issues. Digital government only succeeds when institutions redesign processes, strengthen accountability, and build public trust. So in my country right now, most of our government processes are they're all online processes, but then the people behind it are not delivering within the time frames that they should be delivering, and there's no governance in place to ensure that the public receives the public good when they should be getting it, and the investor continues to be perpetually frustrated. This requires coordination, planning across everything, and I'm talking finance, infrastructure, agriculture, local government. Complex problems require integrated governance, not independent governance. And within our small states, we have all these government ministries fighting against each other, not realizing that it's for the one common good of our individual people. The Belizeans for a Belizean government for the Belizean people, the Guyanese government for the Guyanese people, the Jamaican government for the Jamaican government. One of the greatest governance challenges facing the Caribbean today is translating political vision really into sustained institutional performance. Through my consulting work, I've observed a consistent pattern. Whether public, private, or nonprofits rarely struggle because they lack strategic plans. More often, they struggle with execution. Execution is where we're all stuck. All of our amazing plans and strategies go into that drawer. And this is happening across UN agencies, across multinationals. They pay for all of these elaborate plans, but execution never has the dollars or the imperative or the people to roll it out. There is a disconnect between vision and implementation, between accountability and ownership, between ambition and capacity. We have to remember that the same is true in governance. Policy without implementation is aspiration. Politics without accountability is unsustainable. Performance is what builds public trust and what citizens are ultimately measuring us against. And we can't be held hostage by the unions. Remember, refining performance, activities, outcomes over activities. Not the amount of meetings we've had, but the problems we've solved. Not the budget we've spent, but the public value we've created. Not the projects we've launched, but the sustainable citizen impacts that are across the board, from our youngest to our eldest. Policy, not the policy papers signed off, but the improved ease of doing business within our legislation or in terms of our countries. Not the initiatives announced and the YouTube videos that are across all of our media right now, but the measurable trust in institutions where people say, I can trust going there. I know that they will deliver what I've asked for when I've needed it most. From a passport to a birth certificate to a land document to whatever it is that we need within our regular lives to be able to survive and exist. The future of Caribbean governance lies in outcome-focused, data-driven public management. Performance is not about how many initiatives are launched. It is about whether people's lives are measurably improved, Madam Moderator. That requires clear objectives, meaningful indicators, and the willingness to learn and adapt. And I've looked at 5 priorities for the next decade. We need to build resilient institutions, evidence-informed policymaking, smart digitalization, strategic partnerships, but definitely cultures of accountability. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chamberlain, for your powerful presentation. Lots of nuggets and takeaway, which I'm taking notes, copious notes on. But I'm going to give the second panelist the opportunity to give her perspective, her comments, and then we, at the end of the 3 panelists, of course, we'll have a segment to take all the questions. So next panelist would be Miss Mohini Somaroo from Guyana. Mohini, over to you.
Well, moderator, thank you very much. Thank you to CCGI. I was just wondering if I needed to say anything else after Dr. Chamberlain's beautiful expose on what this topic is all about. But I will try, certainly not to better that. But from where I sit, the topic that we are talking about this afternoon is governance, or as a matter of fact, for the week, is governance in a volatile world. And our focus today, or this panel, is policy, politics, and performance. Now, we have to understand that the world that we are operating in today is not just volatile. It is also highly uncertain. It is unassumingly complex, and it is very, very ambiguous. Some theorists will call that, I came across this as part of my studies, that we are operating in a VUCA environment. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It is an environment that and more so, it is important for us to recognize it when we are talking about public sector. And the evidence around us as a Caribbean, I don't think we can discount all of the evidence that is indeed, it is a VUCA environment we are operating in. We don't need a microscope to see it. Looking at the topic at hand, though, policy, politics, and performance. Policy for me is about the ideal. We create policies because we create what we ideally want something to, the process that we ideally want it to be, right? Something that we ideally want to achieve. Politics, on the other hand, from where I sit, is about negotiating how we can bend those policies to suit us, right? Or the implementers of the policies that we create. Politics that is where the negotiation. How can we bend this rule that we just had created in a policy document, right? And performance, on the other hand, is where we measure, is the measurement basically of both that ideal that we want and the negotiation that happens. Basically, using Dr. Chamberlain's words, that the bridge basically between the promise that we made through the policy document and the trust created through the execution of the policy document. and how much you can negotiate through politics, right, of that policy document. So we know that governance involves basically, if you're talking governance now, rules, practices, structures, basically a guide for how things are to be done, how we are to do things. And the modern state that we are living in, we are operating in, multi-layered institutions with overlapping mandates. We would have one ministry dealing with one area, and then when you go for something else, you have to go straight to it. In Guyana, you go to you register a business, you will go to one agency, and then you will understand that you have to get a license for something else that has another agency. You have to overlapping mandates. So for us, we are considered in Guyana, the world over is saying that we are the fastest growing economy right now, and we are going through rapid modernization. Anybody comes to Guyana right now, if you have visited within the last year and you come right now, you're going to tell us how much it has changed from when you visited last year. More so if you would have visited last 5 years, all right? The public sector is operating in a multi-actor environment right now, with our policy ambition being extremely high. Our government of the day is driven basically because of where we are and how we are how our country, the way our country is going. So we are basically over the top right now. Our government is over the top looking at modernization. And we are so ambitious that we are not looking at modernization in just one sector at a time and say that, okay, we're going to look at the Ministry of Finance. Then when that is finished, we're going to go to the Ministry of Health. No, we are ambitious enough to want to tackle it all at one time, right? We're looking at agriculture, we're looking at healthcare, we're looking at tourism and hospitality, and then we have digitizing of the public service, just to name a few, all right? So we want to do it. And can we do it? Certainly we can. I'm pretty sure we're going to get it done, right? That is my trust that we are going to get it done. So what are some of the challenges as we move through this VUCA environment, given the topic we're looking at, and given what we want to do as a country? Institutional capacity pressure. We do not have our institutions here, given the kind of transformation that has been happening over the past couple of years. We did not plan for it, right? So the manner in which that transformation is, the timeliness of that transformation, is putting pressure on our institutions. Then the changing policies that we have to adapt. Accelerated growth is bringing on the need for us to adjust our policy documents, which are old and outdated, right? Some of them. Then infrastructural capacity is not a challenge. We are very proud, and I think I heard Richard mention it in his presentation, very, very proud of the new Barjagdio-Demarara River Bridge. But our transport system is taking a beating, and he mentioned the road to the airport. Our ability to cater for growth in visitors, both short and long term, from a housing perspective, is a major challenge, right? Political, the next point I would want to say, political polarization and fragmentation. We recently had elections, and we would have seen a shift from the two political parties that we were accustomed to. We did see that the the opposition now is no longer the opposition that we were accustomed to seeing between the two main political parties. But yet, though that shift happened, we still remain politically divided. And then coming down to the oil and gas, we have as a challenge, we still have to maneuver the resource cost trap. Right? Will we be able to avoid this as a country? Is a question we still have to ask. Then climate change awareness is another thing as a country, as we are modernizing. Just the other day, natural disasters are something Guyana would have dealt with, things like flooding. We don't know about hurricanes and those things. We're going to leave that to our Caribbean friends to deal with. But just the other day, we had a situation where we had to deal with high winds in the Venezuelan area, Essequibo area, that we had to attend to. So are we prepared? And then we have the security and sovereignty that we have to consider. The Guyana-Venezuela border controversy still at ICJ, all right? And we still have to deal with this. So how do we strategize? And then last but certainly not least, financial pressure. Yes, we are getting revenues from the oil industry. But the question is, complying with all of these new regulations that we have to put in place, requires training, requires retraining of staff, and that in itself is a cost, which I don't know if many institutions have taken that as something that, they have to budget for, right? And they have to plan for. So let me wrap that now. And this is me giving the challenges from a civilian perspective. I'm no expert and I'm not speaking on behalf of the government of Guyana. So let me zone into the industry that I operate in and bringing some of those same challenges into that industry, maritime shipping industry. We deal with institutional capacity gaps. Key institutions within the industry is modernizing. We have the Maritime Administration Department that is continuously modernizing, since we would have more so since with the oil and gas industry. But we are still faced with staff shortages in that area, outdated systems, and regulations and policy documents that have to be put in place. Customs operations is still a challenge, right? Regulatory and policy fluidity. As the fastest growing economy, our policies are not up to date. And that delay is causing frustration on investors. Infrastructural change, port congestions, again, as it is with the industry that we have now, we have port congestions, we have aging wharves, we have silted channel, which creating bottlenecks and places extreme pressure on the infrastructure that we have, right? Development is not happening as fast as the surge in cargo volume that is coming into our country. So how does this affect, basically, in keeping with the tone of what we were supposed to be doing? How does it affect or impact stakeholders? Operational efficiency, turnaround time for vessels, and I'm looking at this from an industry perspective, not from a country perspective. So the turnaround time for vessels can create increasing operating cost, which ultimately is transferred to the public. And then we have workforce pressure, as we would have identified from a national level, comes down to the institutional level, comes down to the sector level. Extended hours by a limited workforce is a reality right now for us in Guyana. And it is putting pressure on the limited workforce, right? Working longer hours, less time for family, things like that. So it is impacting them. So much so that things like mental health now is becoming a concern. And then we also have the frustration of our international partners. Larger vessels, maneuvering the channel is a challenge. It's a logistical challenge. It's a challenge altogether. So we have to still continue to bring smaller vessels. Now, what can we do in terms of addressing these challenges? And just to note that, again, because as a government we are so ambitious, we have started some of the things. And I believe it is just for us to continue in that, with some of the plans that we have put in place. And one other thing, invest. Now, what do we invest in? Resilient port infrastructure. Something that we have already embarked on, as I mentioned, but something that we have to continue. We have to move forward with plans. There is talk of deep water ports. That is something that we have to continue with so that we can satisfy the maritime sector. Accelerate. We need to accelerate the pace of the maritime shipping sector modernization, adopting a continuous compliance with things like the ISPS, the IMO code, MARPOL. And then we also have to, whether through bringing in labor or training our own people, strengthen our workforce. And we have to engage, cross-agency engaging. Embed performance culture with accountability is the last thing, and Dr. Chamberlain mentioned it. Is the last thing I would want to say. So in closing, I would want to say governance for state agency is not just about choosing between the ideal, which is the policy, the negotiation, which is the politics, and how to bridge the two, which is the performance, but instead we need to consider integrating the three, whilst understanding that the institutions should be made more resilient to changes in the political cycles as we move between political cycles. Thank you. Over to you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much for those powerful comments, Mohini. Really good insights in terms of the challenges that you face there, as well as some suggestions in terms of how we can deal with those challenges. I'm going to go to the next panelist, which is Dr. Sharpe. So Dr. Sharpe, over to you to give your insights and comments.
Thank you. Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you. Go right ahead.
Okay, great. So let me also thank the CCGI for this invite. And I'm really just pleased to hear all of us having the same jargon, the same narrative. And so at this point, I probably should just say ditto, and just hand over to you. But I'm thinking though, as I listened to both Dr. Chamberlain and as I listened to Mohini speak just now, a few days ago, it was on the weekend, that I was introduced to a physics concept. It's the second law of thermodynamics called entropy. And while they're speaking, I'm thinking through that entropy is possibly something that we could look at and help, that would assist us in understanding more about governance. Now, I didn't do physics. I didn't do physics in high school. I didn't do physics at all. So I might be simplifying the concept, right? But I'm less interested in the mathematics of it, and I'm more interested in how the principle itself can be applied across the political systems, across social systems, across natural systems. So entropy is commonly understood as the tendency of every system to move from order toward disorder, unless continuous energy is applied to maintain it. Left unattended, systems will decay. Left unattended, structures are going to weaken. If structures and systems are not constantly getting the energy to improve and to maintain them, then we're going to find the world moving into chaos. In a sense, you must tend your garden. In a sense, you must tidy your room. You cannot leave the systems up to themselves. Otherwise, entropy is going to take over. It's a natural process. And so I'm contemplating, haven't thought it through fully, but I'm contemplating to what extent is this second law of thermodynamics? To what extent can we learn and possibly call this the second law of governance? Can we apply entropy to governance? Because maybe, just maybe, governance is not the creation of order. Maybe governance is the continuous resistance of disorder. And that is particularly true and important in this volatile world, Because when you look at all the crises that we are faced with, to what extent are we to step back and look again at how it is that we are defining governance? You know, when the seas calm, maintaining course is quite easy. It's when the storm arrives, you know, that every wave is now pushing the ship off course. And I figure the same must be true for governments, because governance is now no longer about creating order once, but it's about rebuilding order every day. It's about maintenance. So it's not so much only about leadership, but it is about morality. It is about planning. I mean, granted, some of these things can be fitted under leadership. And so I thought that I would have shared 3 main points, but I thought I'd have done the entropy portion first, because governance must be adaptive. Too often we're treating governance as though it is a destination, and governance cannot be a destination. We're actually seeing where the traditional bureaucratic, rigid systems that we have, that they are no longer sufficient. We're even asking ourselves, are they necessary? The way we have organized our societies, do we have to keep them that way? Is another society possible? Is another way of viewing the world possible? We're noting that the traditional state authority, to some extent, is weakening. In some countries, it's really strengthening, but in many other countries, it is weakening. And these traditional states are being threatened by, you know, these powerful global corporations, where their profits are much larger than the GDP of all the Caribbean states put together. What role do they have to play in helping us to understand governance? Social media, what is happening in terms of information and misinformation and all sorts of information? How do we then think through the role of the state? Do we even believe what we are hearing? Are we preparing the world for alien invasion? Will that also contribute to the volatility? Of course, I know some of you don't pay attention to that sort of media, but is it real and is it true? We're seeing the US government releasing all of these documents. Is that just a distraction, or is something that we really should be paying attention to? So yes, we have built the institutions. Yes, we have written the policies. Yes, we have all of our systems in place, but by themselves, they cannot sustain themselves. And so we have to be asking ourselves, what must we do to prevent this entropy from taking us over? The second point that I think I probably want to make is realizing, of course, that order is temporary, because that is what this is showing us. Order is temporary, and that we have to be deliberate about the things that we're doing. Looking at things like, you know, socialization. Of what importance is political socialization? Are we taking that seriously? The way in which we pass the culture on from one generation to another, not just political socialization, but socialization on the whole. When we look at the agents of socialization and how these agents are changing, would have changed, are we surprised then to see what is happening in our societies today? Because if what we had before, we are not maintaining, we are not passing on through the generations. I know here in Jamaica, there was a point where children only had to turn up to get a trophy. You didn't have to compete. I mean, at the school levels, things are possibly much easier than when we went to school how many years ago? You know, because persons are really so fragile. Are we therefore creating a new set of beings, a new set of leadership? So therefore, once these challenges come, because we'd have sheltered previous generations so much they cannot manage and will therefore not able to manage, those are some of the thoughts that I have really been thinking through, as well as I've heard Dr. Chamberlain, just talking about the balancing between the policy, the politics, and the performance. And I'm agreeing with her, because we've got to the point where performance have become performative, So it's not so much asking the question as to whether or not our services are improving, or our institutions really delivering. Is it that trust is declining? And let me plug here that I saw recently where the Freedom House, they would have been looking at freedom in the world. And they would have been doing this from about 1973. And the last report in 2025 would have shown that more countries are less free today than 20 years ago. So even though in 2025 freedom would have decreased, that would have been a trend, a 20-year trend. But have we been paying attention to these things? Or do we wait until we get into a crisis mode before we begin to look at governance, what governance really is? I want us to think through too the quality of our democracy, because I think that is probably where a part of our challenge is. It is not so much democracy by itself, but it's the quality of our democracy. And so we're running ourselves into this modern governance dilemma, because if states are to remain democratic, but everything that we're asking states to do now will require decision-making that is quick, and asking for states to be agile, or for institutions to be agile and to be efficient, etc. That process of decision-making and getting consensus and getting participation tends to be a slow process, because if democracy values things like participation, and consulting, I heard Diego, consultation with citizens, it takes us in Jamaica 20 years to get any one thing done. But crisis in itself demands that we have some action on the floor. How do governments then remain democratic while becoming more agile? Is possibly what I'm asking. And this is particularly an acute problem in the Caribbean, and I'd want to say in the entire global South, because our states still have to navigate colonial legacies. We still have to navigate debt dependencies. We're still navigating so many institutional constraints, etc. So to me, we're now asking possibly an uncomfortable but necessary question. Is it that the governance models that would have been designed under very different historical and institutional conditions, are they sufficient for the realities of the 21st century as we're faced here in the Caribbean? Or should we really rethink all of that? Is it that governance cannot be imported? Is it that governance must be deliberately cultivated as opposed to imported? And then I thought that Jamaica I've been listening to all the wonderful things being said about Jamaica, and it is true. We are doing a few good things, we are recognizing more and more. I heard about the climate, what was that Diego mentioned, the climate, the hurricane things, and all the wonderful things we did, during COVID, the wonderful ways in which our electoral system has been standing the test of times. But while we're having all of these good governance success stories, it has dawned on me that there's still tension. So alongside these greatness, we're still having persistent governance challenges, bureaucratic delays, uneven public service delivery. And though these tensions themselves speak to what we're discussing today about governing in a volatile world, it is not eliminating complexity. But how do we now build institutions that can continue to function, institutions that can continue to adapt, and that can continue to deliver results despite volatility, despite all the other things that we're seeing happening? Can we still govern? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharpe. Lots to think about, lots to debate, lots of questions that I'm sure the participants are eager to even explore a little further. Before we open the floor to question and answer, just want to go back to, in terms of the comments, and to kind of put to you ladies some questions. Well, two questions, because I'm very mindful of the time, but I am seeing a hand raised, so I'm going to get to you just now, Kevin. Just one question. Actually, I'm going to restrict myself to one question. So you would have given all the panelists would have given a lot of things to think about, and certainly in terms of the key takeaway from my perspective, I want to start with what Dr. Sharpe said and the challenge that she had given us in terms of entropy and how we consider governance, and in terms of the role that we play as it relates to the governance structure, and what does that mean in terms of preventing entropy. So starting with the question with what must we do to prevent entropy? And I know this is Dr. Sharpe's question, and I want to just put it to the panelists so I can get some perspective from the other two ladies from their point of view, their vantage point. What can we do to prevent that? Because you would have all touched on the challenges, and of course talking about performance, what it means, bridging the gap between the policy, politics, and performance. So what can we do to prevent entropy? Dr. Chamberlain, I will start with you, and then I'll go to Mohini.
All right, when we look at entropy emphasizes stability over ambition, and it recognizes the complexity of government, and looking at having minimal disorder. One of the things that I believe that we always have to go back to is that focusing only on stability and resilience rather than mere ambition puts us at a very inconveniencing position, because we don't want to treat governance as an abstract that belongs only in a textbook or something partisan that only political stages look at. Good governance has to be very simplified. And on a academic perspective, it means to me that a small business owner, a farmer, or a foreign investor gets the same exact airtime, efficient service, efficient treatment, whether they're in an office with somebody they know or they don't. As small Caribbean states, we have to look not only at the sustainability of the organization or the office, but the outputs at the end of the day. We want to move away from personality-driven governance and anchor ourselves in robust, digital, transparent systems that can outlast any of these electoral cycles. I think well, in my perspective, and it's not to go against anything that anybody said before, but realistically, we ought to look more about the persons who are receiving the services at the end of the day. And that is where the agility comes in, where you switch and you change and you move towards meeting the need of our stakeholder at the end of the day, that they are achieving what they meant to achieve. So it really looks at beginning with the end in mind. And I like the topic where Somini brought up with the port, because it reminds me of my port in Belize, where we had an investor who wanted to invest in our dying port, which was falling apart. But the government decided that we must preserve the jobs of stevedores who carried the items off the container by hand, just for those electoral votes, rather than realize that efficiency, efficacy, and competitiveness by having a good port which could have rivaled along Mexico, which is along our side, and Guatemala along our side, and created a more robust economy for our persons within the south side of our country, that it was more important to preserve that status quo. And so many times we want to look at not creating disorder, but at the very end of the day, disruption is key for us to really gain the type of change that we need within our individual economies to drive things further and take on the level of governance that is needed. We can't stay doing what we've been doing all along. We've got to switch it all up and start from scratch in many instances. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chamberlain. Mohini, over to you for your views.
I would say that for me, if I continue to do the same thing all the time, I'd never ever grow. And so disruption is necessary for us to manage, basically, for us to grow. And entropy should not be it should not be something that we're looking at in a negative. It should be something that we're looking at how to strategize now in the governance world to create that level of that framework that we want now to manage and to carry us through. That's what I would say. That's how I would say that we look at it in terms of we have to have the disruptions. Let us have the disruptions, but let us now put the framework in place to deal with the disruptions, not just, by chance, but strategically deal with the disruptions. And that's what I would say. That's how I would want to deal with it.
Thank you, Mohini. Dr. Sharpe, any response to the comments?
Yes. Because, if we're looking at what we can use to reverse governance entropy, the concept from my understanding, remember I didn't do physics, but when I heard this concept on the weekend, it hit me. Just as how the physical systems will require energy to maintain the order, then the governance system must have some governance energy. But what are these governance energies that will be required? I heard Dr. Chamberlain speak about, and Mohini speak about disruption. And as she said it, I wrote it down. Is disruption the same as destruction? Do we need to destroy to disrupt? So if we're looking at the energies needed for governance, we're talking about visionary leadership, but is leadership alone? It is necessary, but is it sufficient? Because again, I'm looking from 2003, Jamaica, for example, created a committee. It was the EPOC committee. And the EPOC, it was bipartisan, it had civil servants, had private sector, and their aim was to keep government accountable for fiscal spending. That's leadership. And though leadership is necessary, it was not sufficient. Leadership needed to create an institution that could outlive the leaders, because whomever started those committees are no longer there. But given the work, and that committee ended about 2024, but it allowed Jamaica to have done relatively well, to have survived COVID well, for example. I'm just thinking aloud. If we're talking about these energies of governance, are we talking about continuous reform? Are we talking about morality and ethics in this sphere? Are we talking about the institution becoming a learning, and we're constantly learning, where learning never ends? I don't know. I have more questions than I do have solutions. And I figure we do that a lot in academia.
I love her point that she made in reference to the constant disruption, because while we're disrupting continuously, we have to understand that based on the VUCA that Mohini mentioned, we are operating in a Bani environment where we're getting more brittle, or we're having a lot more mental breakdowns. Suicide is on a rise within our communities. Bullying is at extreme rise in corporate Belize. I don't know about your individual countries, but this constant disruption, which never allows you to arrive at that plateau on the step so you can breathe, either applaud yourself or cry because you didn't make success, you're not getting anywhere. You're constantly you're like a hamster. You're on a treadmill non-stop, not losing any weight, not doing anything, not creating energy, not doing anything. You're just going and going and going just to be able to survive. And that is where we're seeing that leadership vacuum even playing a more serious role, as Dr. Sharpe mentioned earlier. I mean, where do we get to the point that we move to that next level is really important.
Thank you.
Tonika,
Thank you,
I
panelists. Yeah,
just wanted to
sorry.
make this point. I mean,
Sure.
don't you just love the brilliance of these ladies?
Yes, I was thinking that we need more
Absolutely.
time,
I'm thinking
Kamla.
we are so lucky.
Yep,
We are so lucky at the quality of contributions that we have gotten,
absolutely.
you know.
Yep,
And I
absolutely.
like how you have you had actually targeted on that point from Charlene. And Charlene, you know, I'm always blown away by the way your mind works. You bring these ideas just totally out of the blue, and then challenge us to rethink things. And you know, it's probably maybe a Jamaican thing as well, which is why the country has been able to really take the bull by the horns and understand that you do have to put things in place. And I agree, Charlene. I accept. It's not perfect. You still have issues with service delivery in some areas and all that. But what you have done is phenomenal still, you know? And I think when we look at your question and consider that you have to constantly work to bring order. Now that is a tremendous lesson for us, that when we look at governance, you don't just put the policies in place. You can't just say, okay, I have a governance framework. You can't just say, okay, I've identified committees, I've written a board charter. Those things are not sufficient in themselves, because you have to consider what are the things that actually constantly work to bring order. I love the challenge, you know, and this, if we think about this to say, what then can we do that is unique to the region? So we don't necessarily have to look at best practice coming from the first world, where their culture is entirely different, where the resources they have available to them is entirely different, where the kind of climate risk they face is entirely different. You know, so I'm just loving this conversation. And I was happy
Absolutely.
to, Tonika, there was a really lovely comment in the chat from Johanna Seaton. You'd probably
Okay.
want to read it out as
Yeah,
well.
I'm going to certainly get to that. And Kevin, I'm going to come to
And we'll
you
come
with
back to
your
him.
question. Yeah. So Joanna wrote, and I'm going to read verbatim. Wow, Dr. Sharpe's presentation has truly resonated with me, both professionally in governance and personally in self-management. Her use of the physics principle of entropy as an analogy for governance and leadership was brilliant. Effective governance requires the continual investment, time, attention, and discipline to preserve and strengthen systems. The same applies to our personal lives and self-management. It also aligns well with the public policy cycle, reinforcing the importance of regularly reviewing and revising policies to keep them effective and relevant. Yeah. Thank you so much for that comment. I think it's very appropriate, and certainly in terms of the presentation from all the panelists, I think you all would have touched on some key areas and giving us a lot to think about in terms of governance in the public sector. But I know we're running out of time, so I want to give the participants some time to uh
We
to
have
ask
just
their
about
questions.
25 minutes, Tonika.
Yes. Okay.
So you're good.
So I'm going to go to Kevin. I know your hand was raised, so I'm going to take your question first, and then we can go to any other participants.
All right. First of all, it is such an honor and pleasure to be participating and speaking directly to a panel full of ladies that brought a lot of good points forward there. But before I continue, I just want to shout out to another lady there. I saw Miss Faye Lopez Collymore, who was also a lecturer of mine. And just like Miss Kamala Rampersad Silva, she's just spot on point with corporate governance. And trust me, I learned a lot from them with regards to that. But anyways, Dr. Chamberlain, you started off very, very well and brought up some good points. One good thing you spoke about was the trust of government and the institutions and so on in times of uncertainty. And where trust is concerned, I think all of you would have mentioned something regarding trust. And earlier, it was discussed as well to where trust is concerned, that the general consensus and the population at large, even in Trinidad and even beyond, they would have lost trust on the whole in governance, in government, everything like that there because of the failure of institutions, right? And Dr. Chamberlain did say an excellent thing about corporate bullying, because if you belong to the corporate sector, both private and public, that does happen, but it starts with the politicians, and I'm going to leave that right there, right? Ms. Somaroo made a very good point about the overlapping mandates, right? Just about a while back, a couple of weeks ago, I attended something at the Hewitting Law School. They wanted law people to come and lawyers and whatever it is to attend to this day. And it was so happened conducted by the Chancellor of the Judiciary, which was such a great honor to have participated in that day, Justice Roxanne George. She did explain about the judicial system and the overlap in that very thing you said there, and how it's happening and what is going on, and and how they're trying to move there. And we spoke about lengths and breadths about the masters and so on there. But Dr. Sharpe, your perspective today, showed a different light of things there. And I think, from that scientific point of view, having background in political science as well, to, the science part of it there, merely resonated to a point. But as I said there, I think where trust and so on is concerned, this is the question. I have two questions for all of you on this panel here, and this is how it goes. Question one: how can governance or governance practitioners also assist across the region in trying to regain or build that trust in the process of accountability, where sufficiency is concerned, and what results to get the results that we needed to get, right? And that's one. And the other thing is just a simple thing. Here in Trinidad, we brag about constitutional reform there. They talk about that all the time, and it's just about a bunch of windy rhetoric as far as I'm concerned. But let's hold constitutional reform. Do you all believe that we need governance reform? And that's from me there. Thank you very much.
When you speak about the aspect of building trust, first of all, it requires that you identify when the trust was broken, how the trust was broken, and that is where I know that that earlier, Dr. Sharpe mentioned the difficulty of consultation, but I'm just talking like just randomly identifying when did it break and how did it break and what caused it to break. And realistically, I go back to a book that I read by David Meister. It was Strategy and the Big Fat Smoker. And that's how I've approached everything in terms of my strategy. It's that we all tend to want to get very highfalutin and large scaled in reference to how we approach anything. But strategy really requires that you look at it very simplistically, just like trust. If I broke your trust, I need to identify why the trust was broken, how was it broken, and how can I rebuild it? And at the same time, and so many times, this is the problem within many of our sectors. We don't want to admit fault. We don't want to say that we failed you as a society. We affected you and we did not do well, and we're going to now do it over again. Many times when companies relaunch or rebrand, it's just to say, you know what, my brand was not good enough, and I believe you deserve more, and I will now launch it in the way that you expect it to be. However, many people want to relaunch without saying, I'm sorry. So in governance, for instance, and building trust, our government have to get down to the reality and admitting, I went wrong. I did wrong. I did not put you as my constituents first. I put a selective few ahead of all of you. And you know what? This is what I'm going to do. And then they have to create that grievance mechanism that I can now tell you when you screw up again, that you have. And then you have to again be responsive to me. But the way that many people try to build trust is they tell you I did nothing wrong. I will create a new strategy without asking you if this will help or if it will work. I will implement it, and then I will tell you, you're fixed. You got everything okay now. We're straight. How can it be straight? You never spoke to me. You never consulted. You never got to the point of fixing it. At the end of the day, good governance is not measured by the promises that governments make, but by the confidence that people have in institutions that will deliver. They don't want a lot. They want to go to the public hospital and that they will give them attention when they walk in because they're in pain, and that they will bring out a good piece of medicine, not something that they source from out of somebody's back truck that won't really work, and that they will put a plaster on me that will be fixed, and that the person will make sure he didn't leave the scissors inside my belly when he cut me open. These are just simple things that we're asking as a society. None of us are asking. Trust for us is that I go to the doctor and I get treated with respect, with care, and that I recover the best that I could have. Not that all of this malpractice is bad treatment when I show up, whatever it is that occurs. And that's one of the things that people don't understand, is that people are not complex. We just want to be treated how we ought to be treated, with respect, with kindness, and with humanity, because all of us are created equal. All of us are the same, no matter what creed, color, religion, whatever we are, male, female, whatever. We just want respect. And that's it. And that's simple. And if that were to happen, trust me, governance would not be an issue.
I'm agreeing with you, Dr. Chamberlain. As a matter of fact, I probably would want to look at it as, do we need governance reform? Yes. But from a political standpoint, as necessary as that is, it is not sufficient. Because government reform is to achieve a certain end. And what is that end? Improvement in people's lives. So trust is where the problem is. And trust is not created through legislation. You cannot legislate trust, It's not through restructuring institutions, etc., that we're going to be building trust. Trust is earned. So it's when persons can know that their politicians will not be in another scandal. It's when persons know that there is, fairness and there's integrity. This is what, over a period of time, persistent performance, not performative action, but performance over a period of time. That is how we're going to be building trust. So to some extent, then probably we need to be moving away from just seeing governance in terms of governing institutions. As Dr. Chamberlain, I'm reading what she's saying. Probably the governance reform should look at, how are we governing relationships?
That's the one.
And I would add to that to say that reform goes hand in hand with what would have happened to break that trust that we're talking about. Something had to happen to break it. Why would we want reform if something did not happen, right? So, Kevin, to answer basically, do we need governance reform? Maybe yes. But the first question we should ask, what do we want to see? What is the end game, as Dr. Chamberlain said? What is the end result? What do we want to achieve, right? So do we need it? I would say yes, we do, but we have to know what it is we want. And trust, when it comes to governance and trust, as mentioned earlier, trust is not something that that is too much. It is not something that you're asking too much of. It is that whatever is expected, and maybe this is where the gray area is, not necessarily in the trust itself, but it is in the area of the expectation of society. And maybe that is what we should be looking at, that not necessarily the issue of trust, that, you didn't deliver what I expected. Did you deliver what you said you were going to deliver, or what it is I expected? If it is what I expected, maybe you don't have it is not your problem, it is my problem. But if it is what you said you were going to deliver and you did not, then it is your problem. And I think that is what we need to understand and get right.
If I may contribute just a thought to this as well, Tonika. It is for us to also extend that conversation into what is the situation in which we are building this trust. I think something we have to admit is the challenge we have with our cultures in the region. our cultures of poor performance and poor service and inadequate things, it's not just what government needs to provide. We also have to look at what we contribute. We also have to look at when do we live up to our words? Because when we talk about trust and the idea that your trust has to be earned as well, it's a two-way street. And so for us to sit and think about what are the reforms that need to be put in place to fix others, then I think we haven't quite gotten it yet. So that I wanted to make sure and bring that back home to us in terms of our responsibility in all of this as well. So we have 15 more minutes to go, Tonika, and I'm just really, really enjoying this. It has my mind reeling all over the place in terms of how can I take everything that Dionne has said and put it into that framework that Charlene has challenged us with, and see it in the way how Mohini was able to sit and really so beautifully weave together all the many things that are happening in Guyana at the same time, and how we are trying to get the outcomes that we want. It's, if we could bring all these things together, really and truly, we will begin to have that plan of action of how we can help improve things in our state enterprises.
Indeed. And that's a nice segue to my question, which of course will be posed and asking the ladies to give their closing thoughts, because I know that we are really mindful of the time. But it's the question around, and going back to what Mohini had said about the VUCA environment, and what is the role that government as well as the private sector, and Kamla touched on it, but when we talk about private sector, it's from a broader perspective in terms of citizens in general. What is the role that we play, as well as whether there's need for collaboration between those sectors that would ensure or that would allow for improvement in governance, in the outcomes generally, based on the challenges that we currently face in the Caribbean as a whole.
All right,
I'm
you
personally sorry.
let Dr.
Go
Chamberlain
ahead.
go. Let her go. Let her go ahead, Dr. Chamberlain.
In reference to what you just said, I'm getting particularly concerned because I do a lot of consulting within private sector companies. And my concern is because we want to have these objective appraisal systems in place, right? We want to focus so heavily on KPIs and OKRs and whatever it is. And it becomes quite a checklist. It kind of like when I started out, we just want to know, did you have 5 meetings for this quarter? Check, so you get your 5 points. Did you whatever? It's not about the quality or the impact that it made to the organization anymore. I believe that at one point in time we had nothing. Then we got all excited about the management scorecards, and then we got to different levels. And getting back to governance and boards, for instance, I've been evaluating boards and I've actually been working on governance plans for certain boards. And most of my governance plans have been requested by the CEO or the MD. And the reason is they call me and they say, listen to me, I need you to come to our board, but pretend that you didn't talk to me. But I am worried because I am the CEO and they're telling me to put this into place, implement this, get this done. But guess what? They are overstepping. They're not recusing themselves when they're having a topic that is controversial to them and their life. Their uncle wants to get a loan from the company and they don't mind. And can you help us create a governance package for them, but sell it to them like if you were the one who thought it would be best in their best interest. And so while we talk about board and board governance and all of these implementations, I'm starting to see us shifting away from the humanity in it, which is where the reality comes, and getting very heavily set with this stroke of the pen stuff. Checklist 1, 2, 3. Okay, we're good. So again, going back to looking good rather than doing good, being able to show these scorecards and these dashboards that come up really perfect. But at the end of the day, we are failing, where boards are filled up with sorry guys, but a lot of old men who are kind of like, I mean, boys club kind of thing. They can barely move. They're not prepared for anything. They're not agile. They're not moving. And we expect growth and we expect change and we expect all of this to occur. We really need to I mean, start from scratch and do something that takes it to the next level if we're really serious about it. But honestly, I'm not seeing it in my country. I don't know if you all are seeing it in yours, but I really do believe that in traditional boards in my country, for instance, people want it badly because it pays well. And the people who could really make a difference in driving the country forward are not being included at the table. And sad to say, but us women are not being invited as often as I believe that we should. And so there has to be some level of gender equity that goes on there. And yes, we have to be curious and we have to continue growing and we have to get to that level. But the reality is that I think that is one of the biggest areas that we have to focus on to take us to the next level. So it's not a talk shop. We need to go back to our offices and look at our boards, look at our people and saying, are we a checklist or are we a do list with compassion and empathy, which can drive people forward? Because people are losing their sense of identity. They're losing their humanity. They're becoming insensitive to crime. They're becoming insensitive to all of the things that are affecting us and losing their souls, in my opinion. And that's where we need to do. We capture our souls in governance, boards, companies, whatever it is.
Beautifully said. I would want to say, I've always maintained governance and compliance are two different things. And to answer your question, Tonika, it is not so much about governance, but it is about compliance. Are we, and not the checklist compliance. When we have these meetings, taking off of what Dr. Chamberlain said, and we take off that we would have had 12 meetings for the year, 12 board meetings we sat and we had 12 meetings. What came out? What were the decisions that came out of those 12 meetings that we had that we can sit back on the 13th month and say, hey, you know what? This is what we did, not the checklist that we would have had 12 meetings. But these are the decisions that we took that can take this company, take this country forward. If we're looking at it from a country perspective, at the end of the year, is the government in power taking a look at the policies that they would have developed, they would have given to the society and tell the constituents, this is what we are going to be doing. Do they take a look at it and say that we have achieved this, not in a checklist form, but in an actual implementation and result-driven form? And that would be what I would want to close with, that when we are thinking about governance and we are thinking about compliance, let us make sure that we are thinking along the line of not the checklist that we have actually had meetings and you would have came to all of the meetings that was scheduled for the year, but that you would have made a contribution to the company, the country, if it is, we're looking at it country perspective, that can take it forward, whether you are there next year on the board of directors or not. And that is what I would want to say.
And that they're implemented.
Yes.
Order, we're saying and seeing, is temporary. Because if entropy is natural, then to what extent, even in applying the concept to trust, can we say that trust is not a permanent order or permanent achievement? You know, it is something that must be renewed, it must be replenished, because I'm just seeing this loop. When we're doing accreditation at university, they talk about continuous improvement and putting this loop together. To what extent are we, from a governance perspective, seeing that trust is not just what you put in, but it's also what you get out as a part of good governance? So good governance, if it is good, then you will have better outcomes. And because you're having better outcomes, you will have greater trust. Yeah. And if persons are more trusting, then you will have more people cooperating, working together, not they versus us, not government versus citizens, but we're working together. And if we're working together, you're going to have better governance. So it is a cycle. It's like a loop. And I figure the opposite is true. If you have poor governance, then people won't trust, then less compliance, but where do you start in that circle? Because it is a cycle. Do we start at good governance? Or do we start at trust? Or do we start at just getting better outcomes? I'm not sure how this feedback loop would impact us.
And maybe just try for all at the same time.
Can we?
Yeah, as Mohini said, Guyana is trying to achieve everything at the same time. They do have the resources that, they hopefully can be able to do it. Because I think, Charlene, in this world that is so complex with so many different things coming at this, there's not time for us to take one step at a time. Yeah, we need to be bold and we need to just dive in, but dive in with a plan as to what are the outcomes you want to see.
Right. Yeah. What are those input to build the trust? The leadership, the type of leadership, because it goes back to the quality. It's the quality of the democracy. It is the reforms, it goes back to all of the things that Mohini and Dr. Chamberlain said.
What is needed to build the trust? It is the leadership, and the leadership need to make sure that it aligns itself with the outcome. And the outcome for the big picture, not the outcome for self.
Yes, for self. That's right.
Right.
Within our region specifically right now, most of our countries are looking at President Bukele, who has completely shifted and changed around the conditions within San Salvador, where people are now going back home to live because they now feel that their home is a place that is safe. Finances are flowing. So it just takes one committed leader to guide us. And like Dr. Sharpe said, is that you trust me, I trust you, we become more trustworthy, we become more worthy of trust. It's a circular thing. You break my trust, I tell you about it, you fix yourself, you move on. It's not about we're not looking for blind trust. We're looking for worthy trust that is worthy of each other. Where you do, I do, and we continuously look at that. Because if we can really strengthen our institutions and improve the implementation and measure what truly matters, governance becomes not just a system of administration, but a driver of our national development. And that is our greatest asset in the Caribbean, our resilience, our ability to move forward. And so we have to make sure that our governance systems are equally resilient. And I believe that from all that has been said, that is where we need to move.
Tonika,
Brilliant.
you were closing remarks.
Yeah. So the term that comes to my mind is mutual trust. And this is really a high note to end this panel conversation. Thank you so much, ladies. Really insightful and very enriching. I'm sure we're all leaving here with lots of things to think about in terms of what we can, the role we can play, and certainly how we can deal with some of these challenges as we go forward in our governance journey. So I would now hand you over back to Kamla and her team to close off the conversation, the panel conversation.
Thank you so much, Tonika. And when you look at today's topic, policy, politics, and performance, navigating governance in complex state systems, I think our panelists did more than justice to this topic. It was really, really exceptionally handled. So thank you so much, Dionne. Thank you, Mohini. Thank you, Charlene. And of course, Tonika, thank you so much for agreeing to serve as our moderator for today and doing such a great job at it as well. And so we are going to get ready for a short break first, and then we move to our final panel for today. And here the topic: restoring trust, transparency, ethics, and citizen confidence in government. And our panelists would be Afra Raymond, Jeanette Calder, and Jason Farley from Guyana. Our moderator would be Karen Kelshaw Lee. So we know we are going to continue to have a brilliant conversation as we continue with day 3 of Governance Week here with the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute. Quantrell, I'm going to ask you to play the lovely pan music from Joshua Regrello in the background as we say thank you to our sponsors and wrap up this panel discussion. Thank you so much. We go on a short break now and we come back at the top of the hour to complete day 3 of Governance Week. And I did forget to ask you guys, please remember to give us your feedback. The survey was put in the chat and it's important